Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have one quick administrative announcement before we hand it over to our speaker to kick off the session. This session has pre-qualified to support continuing education requirements for several cybersecurity certifications. If you are a member seeking attendance documentation, please be sure to scan your badge at the scanner located in the back of the seating area at the conclusion of the session. Scanners shut off 15 minutes post-session, so please get your badge scanned before networking with the speaker. Also note that to qualify for CEUs and CPEs, the session must run a full 60 minutes. That 60 minutes can include Q&A, so please have questions ready for the speaker to fill that time requirement. Full details for continuing education program are available on the TechNet Cyber app and conference website. Thank you, and now over to our speaker.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me? All right, good. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't like listening to myself for a full hour, so I'm hoping that you all have questions and that we can make this more of a dialogue this morning. My name is Cynthia Carpenter. I'm the Director of DIB Operations within DoD CIO. This is a big portfolio. It includes DIB Cybersecurity, it includes supply chain risk management, it includes CFIUS. So we have a large portfolio of activities that we're undertaking within DoD CIO. And many of you are probably familiar with my boss, Ms. Stacy Botch-Janik. She'll be here later on today. And so the other half of her portfolio is CMMC. That's the verification process on top of the NIST 800-171 requirements. So we have a big pot of activities that we oversee. And so in order to really organize and think about our thoughts and drive priorities, we released a strategy in 2024. We have several activities under the strategy that we'll be talking about today, why they're important, and how we want to work with industry to help us accomplish our goals. So the DoD relies on the DIB to produce the innovative and highly advanced technologies that we rely on. And we find that the DIB is also targeted by nation-state activities. We're hearing more and more. I think the DIB companies are subject to the same sort of protests and different ones that the department has for being, manufacturers of weapon systems. So this type of targeting, it's important to collaborate on. And also the foreign adversaries will also target DIB companies as a threat vector for the department itself. And so we look to continue to keep an open dialogue and this collaboration on these activities to help inform both us and the defense industrial base. So why we need the strategy. You'll hear my leaders use this figure a lot. The Hill estimated in 2024 that $264 billion is lost per year on compromised information. So if you put that in context of the DoD's budget, that's 30% of the department's entire budget. So think about that as a leader going up to your leadership routinely and saying, we've lost 30% of our total spend on information that was lost, exfilled, otherwise is in the hands of our adversary and can be used. So this is a big figure. It constitutes really quite a bit of loss. And we also think about that in the context of the digital age versus the more physical age, right? I mean, we know from cyber incidents that data is lost at least twice a day. Think about that. I mean, every day someone's gone out, they've lost their backups, they've left their file at Starbucks. I mean, the frequency is really quite stunning. It should worry all of us, right? So we're looking to continue to advance solutions and look through all our available tools to help better protect our information and to reduce the loss. So the other fact I was going to give you is that defense companies are found to be at least 1.5 times likely to be targeted as your just plain commercial competitors, and that figure might be a little bit higher as well. So the targeting of the defense companies is very, very real. Okay, so up here you see the strategic nesting of our strategy. This strategy nests within higher level Department of Defense strategy. So the 2022 National Defense Strategy and the 2023 Cybersecurity Strategy. And our strategy responds directly to a requirement to improve the reliability and integrity of critical weapon systems and production nodes. In addition, we're looking to protect critical information on the network. So the scope is quite big of our concerns within the defense industrial base. So here you see the vision, the mission, and our 4 goals, which I'll be diving into more deeply. So the vision's the secure and resilient, superior technologically superior defense industrial base. And here again, as I said, the mission is pretty big, right? We're worried about losing sensitive information. We're worried about our operational capabilities, and we're also worried about product integrity. So this covers the big scope that I was talking about earlier in my portfolio, where we think about cybersecurity concerns, we think about CFIUS concerns, we think about supply chain risk management. So all of this is in this big bucket together, and then we've got these 4 goals to help drive these objectives. So the first goal, this is the one we've spent a lot of time on in this past year. And we're really looking to improve our coordination across the department to drive these efforts. So the first thing we did was we revitalized our executive steering group. We got a lot of senior leader engagement, and we worked with the Deputy Secretary of Defense to reaffirm that the DoD CIO is the coordinating authority for all things DIB cybersecurity this year. And they signed off on that last year, and that helped codify the group that we formed. You know, we did the charter, we did all of the administrative activities to ensure that we're positioned to tackle these activities. In addition, as the new administration has come in, there's been a flurry of executive orders, and one of the ones that we anticipate will be very impactful to our activities is one that was released on March 18th regarding achieving efficiency through state and local preparedness. So we do anticipate that this EO is going to drive the review of some federal level cybersecurity policies, which a lot of the DIB has been working under today, and a lot of the activities have been worked under. So we'll tackle all of these as part of our first goal. This next one about enhancing the cybersecurity posture of the DIB, as I mentioned earlier, the CMMC program verifies DIB companies' compliance with the NIST 800-171 specification. So for those of you that weren't tracking, there's rulemaking that occurred at the end of last year that 32 CFR made the CMMC program voluntary, and companies can start to go ahead and get level 2 assessments for CMMC through the voluntary construct right now. We are continuing to work with this administration on the contractual clause, and at this point in time, you know, the anticipated contract clause will still come out at the end of FY25. And so we're encouraging everyone to get started with their assessments, and I'm going to give you some facts on where we already are. So we've got 2,600 level 1 assessments that have already been recorded, 300 level 2 assessments that have been submitted, and then 65 assessments going through the 3CPAO ecosystem have already been submitted. So we're starting to see the CMMC program roll out, and we expect to continue to see it roll out in the course of the next year. Our leadership, in order to support this activity, has been very, very engaged with senior leadership in the Pentagon to work with private industry on advancing solutions that will help companies with CMMC compliance. So we're seeing VDI solutions emerge. We're seeing 3CPAOs provide additional turnkey solutions. Our colleagues at the Army have been very engaged with working on industries through some efforts that they largely call ENCODE, and includes a couple different lines of activity to help spur the private market for these solutions to ensure that the small businesses still have the opportunity to participate in business with the Department of Defense and have the opportunity to buy solutions in the market that will help them meet these compliance requirements. And this was at a very, very senior level. So the Deputy Secretary went out and has spoken with a lot of the large industries about these solutions and advancing secure information protections. So to complement CMMC, you know, the department will continue to review the efficacy of their cybersecurity requirements. One of the ways we do this is through the cyber incident reporting that we receive. And as I mentioned earlier, since the DFARS clause went into effect in 2017, cyber incident reporting has really normalized. And the department is seeing 500 to 600 reports a year, which again tells us that at least CUI is lost at least 2 to 3 times a day, and everyone, generally suspects that this is a low estimate. But we do appreciate the continued reporting, and one of the asks here today is to think about, as we look to the future, what the department can do to partner with industry on these cyber incident reports after the fact and how to help with recovery efforts. This is something that we're starting to tackle more and more within the department. There's definitely some inequities in industry between the way the large vendors will handle a cyber incident versus the smaller companies that are victimized. We also use this cyber incident reporting to help us understand the efficacy of our requirements. NIST 800-171, in my view, is a baseline, right? And so it's a baseline requirement, and the APT will always be looking to thwart that. So the cyber incident reporting will help us understand, is a lot of the activity that our defense industrial base seeing, is it criminal, or is it really aligned with the APT threat? This is back to also understanding that DIB companies are targeted more frequently than just the commercial industry. And so help us really understand those data sets and have facts to back it to justify our activities. And so again, some of our activities here are a bit aspirational. The recovering from malicious activity is something that we're interested in talking and continuing to work with industry on. All right, goal 3. This is about prioritizing. Again, as we discussed, the defense industrial base is quite large, and so prioritizing our activities and our spend is very, very important. We largely conduct a lot of these activities under the mission assurance construct to think about where our critical nodes are and to continue to think about criticality within the department. And I anticipate in the coming years we'll continue these activities and we'll work internally as well to improve our information sharing, our understanding of the threat landscape, and to drive those activities forward. All right, goal 4. So today we have a couple activities up here for goal 4, but for those of you that have been reading the news, I wanted to talk a little bit today about an effort that DoD just launched. We're calling it SWIFT, SWFT. It's been in the news in a couple different acronyms, so we're going to work with our public affairs people to get our acronym right. But my boss, the PD CIO, Ms. Katie Arrington, recently signed out a memo about the Software Fast Track Initiative. And so this initiative will be coupled with the Software Acquisition Pathway Initiative. The Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, put out a memo on March 6, 2025, about reforming the way the department acquires software. And then SWIFT will be about assessing software and then feed into the authorization process. So all of these activities together are going to help us move faster towards getting modern software on DoD's network. There's a recognition on the procurement side that the current procurement processes can be quite slow, and then there's recognition on the authorization side that the authorization processes can be quite slow. So in between of that, with SWIFT, we're working to expand the body of evidence about software products to help inform authorizing officials and acquisition officials about the level of risk associated with different software products and to improve both of those processes. And so we'll be working across our colleagues in ANS, R&E, and INS on this initiative. And we're currently working under a 30-day sprint. So the memo was signed out on April 24th, and we're looking to have our sprint completed by July, so midsummer. And the memo directed 4 actions. So first, we'll be reviewing our cybersecurity and SCRIM requirements. We think of these requirements largely in the context of NIST publications, right? So cybersecurity is defined by 853, and then the Defense Industrial Base has the derivative 800-171 requirements. The SCRIM requirements are in the NIST 800-161, if I have my number correct. And then there's also a NIST publication for secure software development. So we're looking across all those control sets and requirements to think about what would be most appropriate to communicate both to our authorizing officials and to our procurement folks about software risk. We'll also be looking to improve our internal software security verification processes and then share that information internally to inform this process. We'll be looking for additional information sharing mechanisms with companies. We have already rolled out and have been asking for SBOM information. We're going to look to determine if that level of information is adequate and is allowing us to perform adequate risk assessments. And then finally, the big goal here is to really expedite the authorization process at the end to make sure that we can adopt modern software within our networks and deploy cutting-edge technologies for our warfighters. So we've released 3 RFIs to complement this effort. They went out on Friday. And the RFIs are broken into 3 parts. So the first RFI is about tooling. And so for those of you that develop software and are required to deliver an SBOM, the tooling is about, what information can be generated to help lower the bar for industry to produce this information. And that conversation about tooling has also been going on in the FedRAMP PMO. I know they've been active with their OSCAL initiative to put out a taxonomy for delivering a body of evidence. I think this is still pretty new for them and somewhat immature, but I know that they had been investing heavily in it. And this was to help industry submit information to the government in a uniform way to help them assess it. I think one of the complaints we hear within RMF is, the AOs keep going back and asking for more and more and more, and there's a desire to get to a method of communication of, okay, this is how you provide it. We're all clear on how you provide it. You don't have to keep doing the OODA loop of asking for more information and more information. The next RFI will be about the third-party assessment community. So I think we're interested in hearing from industry how they audit software today. I think some companies do this internally. There is some amount of third-party assessments that go on out there. We're aware in the FedRAMP community, it seems that those PAOs are already doing assessments on the secure software development, the NIST 218. So we've seen some attestations from some companies against that standard already. And so we're looking to understand the robustness of that community, what industry's perception is of the efficacy of third-party assessors, and how much they're leveraged or not today. And then the last RFI is about AI tooling. So how can we work with, an assistant of some sort to submit a body of evidence, have it evaluate and analyze the evidence, and provide a recommendation. So we're also looking to understand the maturity of that market and what any potential models for assessing a product and coming up and enriching the assessment information, what that looks like. So these RFIs are due back on May 20th. They just went out on Friday. They're posted on sam.gov, so we're looking for robust participation in them. So again, the SWIFT initiative is about accelerating secure software delivery to the warfighter and to improve readiness and lethality, right? So we're just, in this 90-day sprint, we're really looking to put together our implementation plan and our framework for how we'll move forward on advancing software delivery in conjunction with ANS. And also, I'll be working closely with our RMF team on that process. And so we're going to plug SWIFT into the middle there to help inform both communities of interest. So, and this is all in recognition from leadership that outdated cybersecurity authorization processes, they're frustrating agile delivery. I mean, I think for anyone that's done agile delivery outside of the department and inside the department, you've probably had some very different experiences with what people thought those terms meant and what those timelines looked like. So I think it's been a challenge within the department to deploy things quickly and move out in a way that is aligned with the agile methodology thinking. And of course, this is largely driven by the need for the department to think about security and want to ensure that what goes out on the network really is production ready. But we've got some process reengineering in here to get there. Also, we're looking to think about ways we could share information better with industry. I think a lot of what's driving the concern around software is as we see vulnerabilities in the software supply chain, right? We've seen these be exploited more and more frequently, and the authorizing officials do lack the information that they would really need to respond to the kinds of data calls that they receive on, okay, we see this actively exploited in the wild. How do we get to the AO knows that they've got this in their software supply chain? This is a priority for them. And then how do we work with industry to prioritize those fixes? I mean, I can definitely think of a past life for myself where, you get fixing deficiencies in the software world is largely technical debt, right? And so if there's not an emphasis on, what the operational impact is here, and the government can't communicate that well to industry, it's hard to drive that level of prioritization. And then I think we also move into thinking more about our defensive ops as well, because, getting a software product fixed may not always be viable. And then we also have to think about how we might add additional mitigations around the product to prevent or mitigate whatever problem we're trying to deal with. But the first step here is having the knowledge that the problem is going to exist in the product. And today, our authorizing officials just don't have that level of detail, and they simply aren't prepared to respond to all of the data calls they receive when it comes to supply chain risk in the software supply chain. So I think in our RFIs, we do also include some asks to talk to us a bit about the cybersecurity and SCRM requirements. As I said, within the federal government, we'll look at these largely through the lens of our NIST requirements. But I'm also interested in hearing from all of you if there's industry standards you feel are more effective, certainly in the cybersecurity world. We know that there's other commercial providers providing controls such as CIS, and that, we've certainly received feedback in the past about where they think certain products can be more actionable than others. Let's see. So the software acquisition pathway, again, working closely with ANS, coupled closely with SWIFT. So we're working to position both our acquisition officials and our authorizing officials to make the decisions faster. SWIFT will be leveraging existing frameworks. We're not anticipating releasing a new framework. We're going to look across the existing framework standards and best practices to deliver the most actionable framework and implementation plan in our 90-day window. So our RFIs are due on May 20th. We're hoping that everyone will participate and respond to us. And then we're looking forward to having more news in July about this. All right, and this is our contact information. So that email address is my office email. We just have an inbox that the team monitors. And then you'll also see that the DoD CIO website. So this is how we're looking to think about our strategic objectives for the FY24 to FY27 period. And then I wanted to also announce that the Zero Trust team, they'll be in the large room here at 10:45. So they're also part of the DoD CIO initiative. And there's a handful of, I think, really exemplary Zero Trust implementations within the department they'll be talking about. And then back here at 2:45, my boss, Stacy Bostianic, will be diving in more on the CMMC program and updates about that. So she'll be here to talk about that more. And so I look forward to all your questions, if there are any. Go ahead. And there's a microphone back there. I don't know if it's useful for everyone, but I know that I find the background noise difficult.
Is it on? Yeah. Good morning. I'm curious if you could speak to the SWIFT strategy as it relates to persistent monitoring and ongoing evaluations as opposed to just a one-time check for any of the vendors.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to continuous monitoring, we've been talking about this internally. It's my perspective, if you're talking about COTS software, then really you get discrete deliveries of COTS software products. As it pertains to GOTS software, I think we're still debating how much that would be in scope of the SWIFT initiative to monitor the software development environment itself against adversary activity. The NIST 218, 281, I think. The Secure Software Development Framework does talk about continuous monitoring. With regards to how the government would approach that, we've got a handful of development environments in the government that are monitored, and so I think that's a more appropriate avenue. And then, SWIFT would think more about delivery time. from a practical standpoint, right?
Good morning. We've seen significant reductions in force at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. What impacts do you see those cuts, particularly in the Cybersecurity Division and the Vulnerability Management Division? What impacts do you think those will have on both DoD and the Defense Industrial Base?
So I've been glad to hear from my colleagues at CISA on Friday. We're aware and tracking. I think we're in a period of time right now where everyone's bringing their cards to the table to talk about how we can carry forward all our missions and think about mission continuity. That will be important as we look to cuts. And I think, you heard me here today say I've got cybersecurity and supply chain risk management in my portfolio. It's a big portfolio, but there's also so much opportunity to share information in ways that we hadn't been doing before. And I think, we see, to be transparent, I think some of the comments about the National Vulnerability Database is that software is vulnerable, right? I mean, my perspective is once you introduce software to a product, you should assume you have introduced vulnerabilities. It's just have we found them and how bad they are. And so as the vulnerability database grew so large, the criticism I heard from cyber defenders was I could spend my whole life patching, right? And so there really needs to be a construct in which we can help prioritize the patching, and that's understanding what's being exploited in the wild. It's understanding how you would apply additional mitigations. We can't just flood people with information that isn't actionable. And so really, as we see parts of the government get smaller, I think it's good for us to get together, rethink what we were doing, be honest about what the challenges were there, and then think about how we all drive towards more action. At the end of the day, as it comes to software, again, I mean, I think we could run a tool on a software product and come up with 100 vulnerabilities. Okay, well, if those vulnerabilities weren't or aren't going to be actively exploited in the near term, what is the value of refocusing all our cyber defenders on that activity right away? And so I think we've got these are hard questions to answer, right? I mean, I think cyber risk is big, and even in the software development, it's small, it's focused. They focus on positive testing, but the way that you break things, the opportunities are infinite, right? And we see even more vulnerabilities where it's not just a single product, it's the combination of vulnerabilities between products that get exploited, and then coupled together, they together make for a really great exploit for the adversary. And you're not going to find that if you're looking at things component by component. And so this is why I also say SWIFT has to plug in and inform the authorizing officials, because at the end of the day, they're still responsible for that risk decision. And if they don't have the knowledge that, wow, okay, I've got these 2 things or 3 things, and they can all be used in parallel, and there's a lot of risk there with this active exploit. So, yes, I think, we've also, the FedRAMP programs also experienced their own cuts, and so we're actively talking about all these things and doing our best to make sure that we keep in touch with our colleagues across the federal government to make sure all our activities carry forward.
Good morning. Thank you for speaking with us today first.
Oh, I need you to pull that mic down a little bit closer to you.
They aimed it for the 6'4" person. Good morning. Thank you for speaking with us. So my question is twofold. You had been speaking about the CMMC and the RMF, and then combining that with SWIFT. Do you envision a flow down of the SWIFT process from the RMF to be incorporated in the overall CMMC process?
I would say just because of where CMMC is in their maturity, and they've got the DFARS contract clause on their mind for the coming year, that CMMC will advance. And our focus with SWIFT is really bringing net new software that the department hasn't had on its network previously, and helping our authorization officials get to a decision. So we've done, our overlays between the supply chain risk management, the secure software, and the NIST 800-171 control set. There isn't a lot of overlap on the 171 control set with the other 2, though I'm reluctant to say that it doesn't help. So I think we'll be looking to see how the 800-171 compliance can assist our program, but our focus is to bring net new software onto the DoD. So that means that my interchange with the RMF team is really my critical path.
And then the second part of my question is for those that are unfamiliar with the Kessel Run process, when can we expect to see an architecture, processes, tools that are incorporated into the SWIFT process? Guesstimate.
So our implementation plan is due in 90 days, and so I only got this project about when the memo was signed out, and so we're still running very, very fast to put together that implementation plan, but we're also working to engage with our colleagues across the department to help inform all of these things.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So one follow-up question actually pertains to the one he just asked. The NIST 853 framework relatively recently came out with the revision 5 that many DoD, JVHQ, DoD systems are still working on migrating to. What kind of churn do you see as a result of this upcoming change over to SWIFT, basically immediately after we complete migration to a new version of our framework?
So we're looking at this in the 853 construct and the RMF process largely through the software assess process and plugging it in through that construct. You're right. I mean, we can't all build it and fly it at the same time. So the RMF team has also been handed a mission to work on accelerating that process within the department, and they are in parallel working through their plans. So we'll be working very closely with them to figure out how we can slot in these software assessments probably through the lens of the assess-only process within RMF. But then also think about how we can get that information out to the larger community, both in acquisition and in the authorizing communities, to understand more about what's in their software products, what the different levels of risk are, what the components are. So this may be a lot about communication throughout the department.
Thank you again for speaking to us. So, just as someone that lives out in the wild, if you would just love to get some tips, words of wisdom, encouragement, maybe. We're for a small to medium-ish defense contractor. We have an MSP division that's focused on helping fellow small to medium-sized defense contractors. As I'm sure you painfully know, it is like dragging our clients to try to get, ready for a level 2 assessment, right? Like until they miss out on, either get something from their core, right, about score and spurs, whatever the case may be, outdated score and spurs, or, they get a solicitation that's got like CMMC references in it. It's just so brutal to get like that buy-in. And the reality is like most of them don't have the resources. They're not going to have like a CMMC team or a cyber team. Like you're lucky if they have a IT or cyber person, right? And there's just not enough, I would say, supply of talent and skills to like for these companies to reasonably have that internally. So obviously for a lot of them it makes sense to outsource. But I guess just from your perspective, obviously, we're living in the trenches every day trying to help, those types of companies. I guess any words of wisdom, things that you've seen that have worked, things to avoid?
So I definitely think this is an important place where you coalesce with your peers, right? And you talk about what solutions have worked and have not worked. And we have been working with the large cloud vendors. We have seen some solutions starting to emerge on the market. We're hopeful that these solutions continue to emerge and mature over time. As you know, the large cloud vendors largely consider themselves platforms, but we're seeing some managed service providers really build on top of those platforms. Of course, it means that the company has to also think diligently about where they store their CUI in order to appropriately scope their boundary. So it does get to be a complicated conversation if the CUI needs to move outside of, say, the email environment or how they're interacting with it. And then, but we're interested in the feedback on where specifically we're seeing challenges. The CMMC's team is interested in that. And then at the department level, there's very, as I said, senior level engagement and interest on this topic and a willingness to go out and talk with industry about these concerns to move it forward. The challenge for the department, as I said, it's real, right? 30% of our budget is estimated to be lost in information loss. The defense industrial base is targeted 1.5 to 2 times more than other industries. The problem is there, and we are definitely interested in solutions to help secure our industry, right?
I'm going to follow up on that, if you might. For the past 2-3 years, rolling 6 months out, there's been discussions about the DoD having some sort of environment that you're going to set up that especially the small companies can utilize. I didn't hear anything about that. Has that just kind of fallen off, or is it still it's 6 months off?
I did not speak about that, but I do believe the Office of Small Business through their Project Spectrum initiative does, I think, and I just didn't get an update for this presentation on where they were, but they have been working on it, and I think they have been onboarding people. So that's through the Office of Small Business. And then, of course, the Army, as I mentioned, they also had an ENCODE pilot that they were working on. And they've looked at a handful of different solutions within the tools that they have available to them to help drive and spur some growth both in private industry and through themselves hosting these secure environments. I'm interested in industry feedback on this, but I think depending upon the company, moving into a DoD-owned cloud environment, may not be as optimal as trying to push towards affordable solutions out in industry, because then the company has control and ownership of their environment. The pilots are just that, they're pilots, right? So if you move into something and then the pilot concludes, then you have to move out, right? So I think the Army, through some of their efforts, have been looked at how can this be privatized, make it affordable for industry, bring the price point to a place where it's affordable for the small businesses to work.
Hey, thank you again for being here. Back to cybersecurity strategy number 3, prioritization and building resiliency into critical nodes. I guess a 2-part question. First off, where are these cybersecurity, or where are the resiliency goals going to be coming from? Are they department priorities? And second part of this is this just for IT systems, or is this for OT as well?
From the mission assurance standpoint, they look at both IT and OT. So, our colleagues on the policy side run those efforts, and they look across actually the spectrum of not just even cybersecurity. They're thinking about it from the full suite of mission assurance interests. And so cybersecurity is just one line of effort for them. And so then, yes, they think about priorities is priorities across the department, and then what we're working to really advance is the thinking of what type of disruption would be most disruptive to these nodes, right? Would a geophysical disaster be most disruptive, or would a cyber disaster be most disruptive? And then start to refine our thinking from there.
Oh, great. Thank you.
All right, guys, how did we do? We need a few more questions.
Thank you again. Just trying to help extend the time, but genuine question here. So I would say one of the things that's been challenging to work through the last few years is DFAR 7012 being in every contract, whether CUI was involved or not. I guess if you could just, I guess when I finish asking, if you could just go through those 3 numbers again. You said something like in the 2000s for level 1, I think was submitted, and then you said 300 level 2, but then you mentioned 65 from
The 3PAO community. That's
Right.
right. So we've had 2,600 level 1 assessments submitted, 300 level 2s, and then 65 where companies worked with the third-party service providers the assessors, the 3PAOs, the third-party assessment organizations, to perform the assessments and have submitted those scores. And you're right, the DFAR 7012 does go into every contract, and it is a challenge that it's up to the company right now to work with their contracting agency on whether or not CUI is in the contract or not. So we've been largely thinking, for anyone that was tracking, there was a FAR clause released in, I believe it was January of this year, and the FAR clause was designed to standardize the equivalent of an SF form for CUI across the federal government. So that clause specifies that the NIST 800-171 standard will be the requirement across the federal government, and that also that there'll be an SF form to help clarify if and when there'll be CUI in the performance of the contract.
Okay. Do you think that, like, as the CMMC program rolls out, and let's say a solicitation has CMMC level 1 specified, and I realize this is like coordination with the acquisition community, and that's, that takes a lot of coordination. So I wonder, I guess, or I'm hopeful that as things like that, like a solicitation has CMMC level 1 specified in it, that hopefully maybe it wouldn't also have DFAR 7012, like pertaining to...
If it has DFAR 7012, it should be clear because of the SF form and the level, what the requirement is.
Okay.
And so I think, and that has been the complication. Is that DFAR 7012 is in every contract, and then the onus has existed between the company and the contracting officer to understand what the requirement really was and whether or not it was applicable. So the language in the FAR clause was designed to help address that through the SF form for CUI, and then also standardizing the requirements across the federal government to help ensure that, to your question about, how do we get people to believe this is real? If we standardize the requirements across the federal government, that helps to ensure that all companies understand what they'll be asked in the future, instead of we're aware even within the department it's not perfect, right? We see sometimes R3s thrown into DFAR 7012 clause, and then folks go back to their contracting officer and say, no, this isn't what it says. And then when you get outside of the Department of Defense, the cybersecurity requirements that may be placed in a contract, we see 853 out there. We see CISA, of course, has their requirements that they put out, and they aren't aligned. And so thinking about how we can make this all roll up to the federal level and be uniform, I think more than anything, to the gentleman's question from CISA about, what do we think will change, is that I expect that there'll be a spotlight on federalizing these requirements so that we move away from this onesie twosie between all the different federal agencies.
Thank you so much.
So follow-up question about a point that you made earlier about the increasing reliance on SaaS, PaaS, IaaS systems. How do you see responsibilities shifting between program management offices, integrators, and the actual platform or service providers? Because as it currently stands, a lot of times it falls on the lowest level rather than the platform, relying on essentially customized solutions and not the true COTS that we are claiming to prioritize. So how do you see that shifting with Swift compared to the NIST framework?
When it comes to the software as a service solutions, we're going to continue to leverage FedRAMP for that. So Swift won't dive into, if you've got basically the full stack software as a service. We'll continue to work with our FedRAMP partners on that, and we'll bound Swift to software that will be installed on the DoD on disparate hardware, and thinking about risk assessment in that way. And again, that's to keep the lines of effort clean. I think that one is a good question, and we haven't really worked out the details of how we would think about that. And I honestly haven't had the opportunity yet to talk with my colleagues over in FedRAMP program about, the changes that they've experienced as well. So I need to get together with FedRAMP, RMF, and my team all together to think about how we integrate smartly. But I can say for sure, software as a service is staying with FedRAMP. All right, is everyone asleep?
So a lot of the services are going to comply for connection.
Comply to connect.
Correct. So on the horizon, is your office also keeping an eye on possibly standardizing that so that the Air Force and, when I go to connect to the different services, I'm not doing different compliance to connect to those services?
So comply to connect is not my AOR, but yes, I definitely think even within the department, we look at some of our assessments for connecting to the DoD and the difference, for instance, between CMMC, and those are active conversations. Driving change across these programs isn't something that happens overnight, but it's recognized that we even have some different assessment processes, and there's opportunities there to do things more uniformly.
Thank you.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, thank you all for joining me today, and look forward to seeing you around the conference hall.